Railroad engineers, what's the creepiest thing you've come across on the tracks? Hey, just wanted to pop in and let you guys know. In this thread, there is a lot of talk about people taking their own lives as well as dead animals. If these are things you don't want to hear about, here's your warning. And now, on with the stories. Not an engineer, but I do operate a high rail truck with train wheels on it that zips down the railroad tracks. I was working in the port of Metro Vancouver and had to measure out 2,500 feet from where we were working to do a certain regulatory test. So I jumped in my truck and reset my counter and went on my way. I arrived at my 2,500 foot stop and jumped out to spray paint the railroad tie to mark that spot for the rest of the crew. I then realized I had no spray paint, nothing in the whole truck. I searched for a little flag I could put up, but had none of those either. I ended up searching the ground for something like a stick or garbage that I could just leave there in the middle of the tracks for the time being. Now, down in the part of Vancouver, the tracks basically run parallel to Hastings Street, and for those of you who have never heard of it, it's basically the world's biggest confined H problem. Drugs Inc. actually did their H episode down there. Anyway, you always find crazy crap along the tracks there. If it's not a body, it's 500 hypodermic needles. So in this giant pile of garbage, I find an old barbecue, complete with a set of barbecue tools like tongs and brush, etc. I thought it would be pretty funny if I just set up a barbecue in the middle of the tracks. We were working, so there was no chance of a train hitting it. So I went to move the barbecue and found, no joke, the biggest, longest, girthiest fake dong I have seen in my life to this day. It was at least 3 feet long and had to have been almost a foot in circumference. Who is buying this kind of thing? I decided this would be the best thing to mark the location with. I ended up finding a couple of old random shoes in that pile, and armed with my tongs I found earlier and a pair of gloves, I managed to jam the dong, balls first obviously, into one of the shoes and got it to stand upright all by itself. I really wish I was able to have my phone at work. I would have had a good picture for you guys. Anyway, with that spot marked for the next guy, I put my truck in reverse and headed back to the crossing we were working at. I arrived and the foreman at the time was asking how I marked the footage without taking the paint. I told him that he would eventually find out when we got there. We packed everything up and we were waiting for a train on the opposite track to go by us when the train's brakes hammered on and started screeching. Scared the crap out of all of us. Now when a train goes into emergency, everything stops, and the traffic controller is on the radio immediately. We were all told to stay where we were as there had been a person struck by a train just half a mile from our job site. We took our truck off the tracks and headed down the parallel road to see what had happened. When we arrived, we found a police officer and 3 Port Authority vehicles there, all parked right beside where I had left my marker. With the way that it had looked and how thick it was, and the fact that the top of it was red, I guess one of the Port Authority officers thought it was a severed leg, and called in to stop all trains in the area and call the police force as well. The look on my foreman's face was priceless when he looked back at me, as he looked at the 4 grown men standing around a 3-foot-high fake dong stuffed into a dirty Reebok. We didn't say a word to anybody about it, as I'm sure we would all be in crap. I realize now this is probably not the response you were looking for, and I'm almost certain you had to be there to really appreciate how ridiculous this was, but you know what? This is all you're getting from me. I also hauled a half a dead bear off the tracks on my second day of working for this company. I've also seen a few dead bodies of people who've thrown themselves in front of trains, but they're just laying in the ditch. They didn't ever end up exploding like I thought they would. I think this qualifies as weird on the tracks. Not creepy, but definitely weird for everyone who didn't know why it was there, or what it was, I guess. Honestly, OP, I think it's hilarious. I don't think you should get in trouble even if you did fess up. How are you supposed to know that was gonna look like a leg to a train conductor? Like, there's probably some rule, but nah, whatever. Story 2. I worked on the signaling for the light rail system in Pittsburgh, USA. We would do all of our testing late at night after revenue hours. Lots of wildlife around the tracks. As we were moving along at about 50 miles per hour, a white-tailed deer jumps out onto the tracks, and we clobber the poor thing. The engineer doesn't hesitate, gets on the radio and tells Central Control to call Hannibal Lecter, and gives the milepost. I look at him sideways, but he doesn't explain. We continue our run into the city, turn around, and head back out the same way. As we come up on the site where we hit the deer, there's a guy in full camo on the side of the railroad butchering the carcass with a big pile of steaming deer guts next to the track. Did I mention it was about 15 degrees Fahrenheit and snowing? Engineer gives a toot on the horn and we continue with our run. Story 3. I work in Houston as an engineer, and we usually putt around town between 10 to 20 miles per hour. Slow enough for a naked addict to jump out of a bush by a city park and start pleasuring herself in front of the engine. I guess she really likes trains. I also had a kid play chicken with my train when I was going about 50 miles per hour, but that was more scary than weird. I haven't hit anybody yet, but everybody says it's only a matter of time. Story 4. Freight train conductor here. Want to know what's creepy or weird? When people try to get across the tracks last second or play chicken with my 30 million pound train. You're not playing chicken with an inanimate object. You're playing with me and my engineer. When you lose, and it happens far too often, I get to see your exploded carcass flipping at 150 RPMs off the track and deal with the overwhelming feeling of guilt. Please don't try to beat a train. Story 5. Dad's a railroad guy in a bigger city yard. He's seen so much death. So much death. Mostly people taking their own lives, jumping in front of trains or laying down on the tracks. He says if you don't lay down the right way, it can actually take a few minutes to die because the weight of the cars seals off anything broken. So even if you're ripped in half, it takes a few minutes to bleed out. TLDR, get help and don't traumatize the people who end up taking your life. Seriously, get help. Story 6. A large part of my family works for the railroad, and here's what I've heard. Not all creepy, but scary. My dad, who is a no-nonsense 6'6" man, came home one night after a derailment and was white as a sheet. He told my mom he met a man walking away from the derailment, which was in the middle of the woods. He didn't think it was too weird because sometimes people check out wrecks and derailments. Anyway, my dad gets to the derailment and says hey to my uncle. The cause of the derailment was a truck that had been hit and then pushed by the engine. Now, none of this was weird until my dad sees the man in the truck. It looked like a beat-up version of the man he met on the way to the derailment. He got the man's driver's license when the sheriff's deputy showed up. The way my uncle put it was, your dad almost passed out and had to sit down. He didn't say why because you don't do that around railroad men. My uncle was walking the rails, which you do to prevent derailments and such, and he had to pee. So he went into some woods. He said he walked up onto what he assumed was some kind of animal sacrifice. He called the other workers to see it, and they were very creeped out. They just left and tried to make a joke out of it. The number of drunk hobos or homeless people who pass out on the rails is oddly high. Also, a hobo was found dead in a hooper car, the kind that are open and typically hold grain. They figured since it was the summer he wanted more air circulation and hopped in that one. Well, the car was filled and no one really looks in it. It wasn't figured out until the car was unloaded. Story 7. Went by a few movie shoots. Biggest one was the first Transformers movie. The scene where Bumblebee gets caught. A lot of movies are shot in that area by the First Street Bridge in LA. Pretty sure there's also an adult content studio not too far from there. There's a nudist colony on one run where an old guy would always come out and wave at the trains. Knew we were coming since there were railroad crossings that we had to whistle for. And got mooned by some guys on a golf course. Not pretty. Story 8. I'm a conductor, so I'm the guy that sits down directly to the left of the engineer. I haven't been doing it for too long yet, so I probably haven't seen the amount of stuff a qualified engineer has. My first week as a trainee on the job, we came across a dead pony next to the tracks that must have been hit only a few hours earlier. The next morning, going back the other way, we passed it again, and it looked like what you would expect to see on a Discovery Channel show. Scavengers had gotten to it that night, and it was maybe half a pony at this point. Nature is pretty rad. Honestly, I think there's something comforting about that. It's sad that it got hit, but it's cool seeing nature do its thing. Scavengers are there for a reason. Mother Earth says waste not. Story 9. I'm a railway engineer in the UK. This time of year is the worst for people taking their own lives, with 2 in the last 2 days on the route I work on. I've been track inspecting before, and from the cleanup of someone taking their own life the night before, they've missed a few bits. So what appears to be a bit of skull or kneecap can be seen. The worst bit is the smell. You become aware of the drug spots across the route too, with the number of needles under bridges. I've seen bongs made out of all sorts of blow-up dolls, vibrators, and worst to this day, half a used fleshlight. My gut wrenches the most when I see pets. Cats and dogs are frequently found. Some jerks in certain spots are taping or gluing used needles to our access gates too. Total sickos. Story 10. I work as a backup janitor when the normal one isn't available. I've seen some very weird things at the places I've cleaned. There are the usual needles and beer cans, not that shocking after a while. But the weirdest thing I've ever seen was when I was called out to a train yard to clean out some disused engines. These things hadn't been used since the mid-90s and were going to be sold for scrap as they were too battered to be refurbished. I was warned beforehand there might be a bum in one of them, but I brushed it off. I'd seen many bums at the various places I cleaned. They usually just ran off when I was coming, so I picked up my bucket and got in the company truck to go out to the disused part of the yard where the trains were, routine janitorial duties. As I'm driving out there, I noticed that I left the keys to the trains back at the office. Oh well, I figure, these things are so old that the door might not even be there anymore. So I drive out to the engines and park my truck and get out. Nothing is creepy at this point, just some rotting diesel engines. I had seen much creepier things before. I walk up the railing and kick in the door with little force. It didn't even have a lock anymore. I walk in and immediately notice something very odd. It's in mint condition. Great, I think, one less room to clean. But then I notice something very, very disturbing. A skeleton perched against the wall. Then I noticed that it's wearing a leather jacket and clutching a pill bottle in its bony hands. It was someone who took their own life. I walk a bit closer and grab the pill bottle from its hand. The prescription date was 10/9/96. This guy had been rotting in a train for decades, and nobody noticed his absence. I pressed the button on my radio and told the guard to call the cops. There's a dead guy in here, and he's been here for a while. About 5 minutes later, a cop car pulls up and an off-duty cop steps out and walks up to the train. Turns out this man had been missing since '97, and nobody cared enough to look for him. He was an elderly man who lost his wife and offed himself in a train. He laid there for decades and was never disturbed. When they buried him a few days later, I was the only one to come. All of his family was dead or didn't care enough. Sad and creepy. Story 11. Been a conductor for about 8 years now. The main thing I've noticed about human behavior since I started working for the railroad is that people seem to view a train as a machine instead of a vehicle being driven by people. Because of this, they're willing to do horrible, ridiculous, dangerous things that they probably wouldn't do if they thought another human being was going to be involved. Here's my list of crap my coworkers and I have seen. More teenagers banging than you can shake a railroad lantern at. Drunks and druggies lost in the middle of nowhere, like miles from anywhere. A coworker came across a train hopper that had his legs sheared off when he tried to jump in an intermodal car without a bottom. The guy lived, too. Another coworker found a teenage murder victim whose murderer tried to cover up her murder by dumping her body on a remote-controlled locomotive track. My uncle was a conductor on a train that hit a woman who wanted to take her own life, who decided to take her dog with her. She lived and the dog didn't. I saw a man trying to take his own life. I was oblivious to what was going on until my engineer said, "I think that guy is going to jump in front of us." I could see the guy trying to time his jump. It's pretty disturbing because there is nothing you can do. A coworker came across $250,000 in counterfeit money in a gym bag. My uncle hit a cow once and managed to knock its butthole out. Some guys laid a bunch of landscaping stones and tie plates on top of the tracks for about 100 yards in front of their trailer park. We could see them all standing back from the tracks drinking beers and waiting. It was all fun and games until our 12K ton train started crushing all the stones and sending shrapnel everywhere. And a train one of my coworkers was on snagged a chain link fence that was being installed and rolled up the guys installing it inside the fencing. They don't think anyone got hurt. It was a pretty rough area though, so they didn't stop to find out. Story 12. I'm not a train engineer per se, but I've spent a lot of years working on the signals of the East Coast. I'd say one of the most interesting things I've seen are the villages of people that pop up in the right spots. Tons of people, dogs, homeless villages with friendly people who aren't afraid or embarrassed ever at all. Also, in some mountain towns of West Virginia, there are some unique folks with tracks also running through their properties. Story 13. As a previous train driver in Sydney, Australia, there were 2 spots to look for naked women who would regularly sunbathe and naked in their backyards in the summer. I've also ran over a lot of stuff like bikes, shopping trolleys, carts, and a lounge. And weirdest thing I've seen was when preparing my train in the yard, I found a brown paper bag with a huge black fake dong in it, and yes, I left it there. Story 14. When my dad was a kid, he and his friends were walking along the railroad tracks one day, and they heard the train coming, so they ran and hid in the bushes while it passed. Afterwards, they went back to what they were doing, and about 5 minutes later came across what he says is by far the worst thing he had seen in his life. Someone tied up 2 dogs and left them on the tracks. They were both freshly decapitated. He still wishes he would have gotten there sooner to save them. Story 15. Up in the coal mines of Wyoming, they have what rail crews call the Golden Arches. It's just a yellow painted framework that has speakers on it that the empty coal trains pass through. A warning is played on repeat saying in Spanish and English, "Danger, get out, the car is about to be loaded." Loaded coal cars get dumped at power plant pits where huge augers break it up. I guess more than a few souls have been augured up accidentally after being covered up with coal. Story 17. Working in a tunnel with 2 other colleagues one time, and we all heard a woman screaming down the tunnel, like in the films when a woman sees a dead body or a man with a gun. Kind of loud, hysterical screaming. 2 of us start sprinting towards that noise, and after 5 to 10 minutes we realize there is nothing there at all. No noise or sign of people. We are so sure we heard screaming, we go to the next station's supervisor, who informs us there is absolutely no one working around that was close enough for us to hear. We were in the deep underground section, and we all heard that same noise. I've heard a colleague speak about walking alone in the tunnels, again away from all the people close to him in the night, and heard someone whispering, and another colleague heard chains at an abandoned station. I'm not a supernatural person, but I have no reason to doubt these guys' stories, as they were told to me one-on-one when I asked a similar question to OP. Very quiet when you're on your own underground, so could be mind playing tricks, I guess, but still, a creepy experience. Also, to lighten up the spookiness, there are a few women who actively flash train drivers from their houses that back onto the train lines. Never seen any of them, but been in a cab with different drivers talking about it happening. Edit. A few people saying foxes. If I were out in the open, I would agree with you. However, I was deep underground and nowhere near a tunnel mouth. I've never seen or heard a fox down there before, and it would be very unlikely one was down there, as there's no food or scraps to attract them. Alright, that's going straight on the list of jobs I never want to do. I don't think I'd ever go back to work after that. I would be terrified. I don't know if I'd be more scared alone or with other people who could corroborate what I heard. Either way, huge nope from me. Story 18. I'm an engineer on a Class 1 on the West Coast. 9+ years of seniority, with 7 being as an engineer. Have never seen anything creepy or mysterious though, but have hit plenty of unfortunate animals, and trespassing incidents are as sky high as ever. Also, train riders may be decent sometimes, but a lot of them are criminals and some are very dangerous. Every so often, a story pops up where some suburban kid decides to ride the rails and ends up dead. It's not a safe environment for anyone, so nothing ghostly or mysterious to report, but please make sure you stay well clear of the tracks. We don't like hitting people. We don't sign up to watch people die, and a lot of coworkers do have a degree of PTSD afterwards. Story 19. My first time on a train, I was traveling in Germany with my grandfather, and he noticed and pointed out to me that we were riding on the wrong tracks. We were northbound on the southern track. Our curiosity got the better of us when I pointed out that there were some guys in bright yellow vests doing some kind of maintenance. And then we noticed there was blood and meat all shredded up on the tracks. We were going real slow because of the workers, and we watched intently, trying to figure out what kind of animal it had been. There were no hooves or fur discernible. Then we went quite a distance without seeing many chunks, but the tracks were still bloody. Then there it was, a blue dress. Story 20. Conductor here. One time in the middle of the night in the middle of winter, 10 degrees and a foot of snow on the ground, my train went into emergency. I had to walk the length of the train to see what the problem was. The train was right in the middle of a very small town. As I'm walking by one of the houses on the outskirts of this town, I see a guy standing in the driveway about 50 feet from me wearing a trench coat and a sock hat type thing. The first thing that struck me as odd is that it was way too cold to be wearing just a trench coat. I shine my lantern on the guy and wave and say hi, but nothing. This guy doesn't even move. I continue walking past the guy to the end of the train while looking back very often. I get to the end, turn around and head back. I get back to the house where this guy was standing and he's still there, same place, same position. I don't even say anything this time, just speed walk back to the head of the train. The next day I'm taking a train back home during the day. I'm paying special attention to this house as we go by it, and there's nothing there. The drive isn't shoveled. Nothing is there that could have been mistaken for a guy in a trench coat. I have since been by this house dozens of times and I've never seen a car parked there or a light on or anything at all. TLDR, saw a scary guy in a trench coat standing in the driveway of an abandoned house at 3 in the morning in the middle of winter. If there were a guy there in a trench coat, why wouldn't he just respond to you saying hi? That is absolutely freaky. OP may have come across a cryptid or something. Maybe it was Bigfoot in a trench coat being like, if I don't move, you can't see me. Anyway, that's the last story for today. I would like to thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or a night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.